Alright, so we're doing something a little different this time. We're going to be doing a video about One Piece chapters 1152 through 1157, which is essentially the Loki, Harald, Rocks, Kuja flashback. So 1152 actually starts out with, or where I'm going to pick up at is just around where the flashback actually starts, which is probably about 50-60% of the way through the chapter. So the initial point that I want to make is that apparently we're getting this from Loki's perspective, which I think is a little wild because honestly there's no way Loki actually knows all this stuff. So we're clearly getting Loki's perspective on some things, but then it's clearly narration giving us information rather than Loki actually giving this information to the Straw Hats and Harding. So I'm interested in knowing exactly, like I wish we knew exactly what he was telling them. I guess we can try to pick out what is getting to them and what's not. But clearly this all cannot be from his perspective because after that it's Scopper informing that him and Shanks had both felt a strange hockey from the castle on the day of Harald's death, and that they probably don't have the full story as to what actually happened to Harald, and that Loki was the only one who could actually tell the story. So he says that Loki has to tell it. Harding says, all right, you have 3 minutes to tell the story about what happened 14 years ago. And there is no world where in 3 minutes Loki can give any type of how long. We're already 5 chapters, like I said, 5.5 chapters in with just right now. I don't think we're nearly done with this flashback. We're probably going to keep rolling through at least, I would guess, 1160 or so in the flashback, because I don't know how much we're going to be getting. But we're skipping through a lot of years. But the thing is, it jumps around so much. There's just so much, there's so much for him to go over, for Oda to kind of get through. So after that, we actually cut back to the beginning of the flashback. 14 years ago, and that's Loki landing at Quest Castle, where Elder Jarl already is. We pretty much just kind of get an idea of how Loki doesn't like how Harald has been governing Elbaf and how he's pushing towards peace and trying to work with the world government. After that, it just cuts to Shanks and Scopper. We get to see Shanks' tattoo on the back of his arm, the one that got bit off by the Sea King in the very beginning of the story, right? It was like his celestial dragon or God's Knight's tattoo. Whatever that really means for us, we know that he at one point went to Marie Joie, and that he clearly met up with the other Figurelands and some of the Celestial Dragons and maybe the Elder. Well, definitely the Elders. And I don't know what that tattoo represents. It seems to mean that he could have used some of the powers that they have, like the Void, I think is what it's been deemed, like the teleportation that the Gods Knights use. But we'll learn more about that at some point, but we don't get any more of that in the flashback at the moment. Scopper does mention, though, that Shanks is a child of destiny. I thought that was something of note. It's kind of an odd point to make, kind of like I believe somebody like Shirahoshi or Luffy. These are children of destiny, right? They have a key point in what's going to happen and how things are going to play out in the world. And we don't know what Shanks' role is exactly yet, but it's clearly pretty important. Shanks does mention that he met Harald actually at a reverie, so he has been at a reverie, not just at the Holy Land, but actually at a reverie, and that's where he met Harald. And he says he actually wants to talk to him on Elbaf because he wants to be able to talk to him more freely. Probably because at this point Shanks had mentioned that he sees the world very differently than he did when he was very young, and he probably saw a way to... Harald probably knew something that he wanted to know, or some clarification. We then cut to seeing stuff happening at Quest Castle at that point, where Harald was being stabbed. We see Jarl getting stabbed right in the head, actually, with the sword that's still through his head now. We don't know who did it, but we see it going through his head. After that, we actually get to cut to Harald's flashback, rather than the Loki flashback of that day. So this is probably the disconnect as to what is not being told to the Straw Hats for the time being. We cut to 109 years ago. It is said that the Kings of the Sea at that point were the giant warrior pirates, which was Dory and Bragi and their base crew at that point, who we know, I don't remember what their bounty was, but we know they were on top of the sea at that point. King Harald was 45 at this point, 109 years ago, which is about 15 in human years, and he was an absolute prick at this point. Like, this guy is an absolute jackass. He treats everybody like shit. And that seems to stem from what we see in the beginning of the next chapter, where we see he grows up with Dory and Bragi, and because Harald's of ancient giant lineage, with the horns and being bigger and stronger, he essentially grows up with the mentality that he's better than everybody, stronger than everybody. Kind of like the Doflamingo mentality, I guess, at first, of how he thought he was better because he was a celestial dragon. But Harald's is more based out of, I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I'm just better. I'm even better than all these giants who are better than these basic humans. So he gained this in the superiority complex that made him into the prick that we see him at the age of 45. We cut to the Bunt Kingdom in the New World. That's actually where we see Harald meet Ida for the first time. Harald begins to be humanized and stops being a complete prick to everybody. That's actually great, because this is where Harald becomes a character that we can actually like pretty quickly, and we go from seeing him as a dick to, within the same chapter, essentially starting to like him. It's pretty quick, but it is nice because we see him beginning to become more like a person. He learns that the giants can learn from humans, that they have technology that the giants don't all have in terms of how they build houses and all kinds of stuff like that. So he sees that they can actually learn from each other. We then cut to them traveling the world. That's Harald, Ida, and his crew at that point. They're traveling around helping different people. We then cut to 4 years later, which is 105 years ago. We get to see Harald trying to move Elbaf towards peace, speaking with some of the townspeople and the elders. He wants to see about building commerce and more community among the other countries with Elbaf all over the world. So that way, again, they can gain more from each other. We then cut after that to 81 years ago, which would be 24 years later, where Haradin is born and Harald is forced to marry the twat Estrid that nobody likes. She is an absolute awful human being. We pretty quickly after that cut to 70 years later. Harald is traveling around. That's all we get to know, that he's still trying to work on kind of building relations with other countries and making Elbaf not look like, a country of like brutes, but people, somebody who, a country who wants to work with others and build this commerce and this community. After that, we then cut to 63 years ago, where Loki is born, and we know the whole story there. He gets thrown off into the underworld by his own mother, and he kills the bear, and he climbs back up with the whole creepy eyes, and he's doing that for a while. Actually, we cut into the next chapter, 1154, where he's still doing that. But we also get information that that's the same year that that Linland's incident happened with the Simla, and then Harald returns to the country around that same time, that same year, because that's where Loki begins to be seen as cursed, as the cursed prince, because all these awful things are happening. That horse died that was given to Harald. The country's going through a great famine, so Harald actually returns with food to save the country from all of these countries that he had began to build this commerce and this community with. Within a few months after that, though, Estrid does die. It just says that she got more and more sad and depressed, and that she continued to denounce Loki and talk awful about him until her death. At this point, Loki's a couple months old, and he's absolutely depressed. It's really terrible to see him. He has his eyes and face wrapped already. We then cut to 56 years ago, where we get to see Harald actually at the Reverie, or where we heard that Harald was at the Reverie. And then we learn about the Galera Warhammer Company from Jarl. Apparently they are a set of giant shipwrights who were armed with warhammers. That's all we got on them. It's interesting to note that they're called the Galera Warhammer Company, but Galley Law is who we know from Water 7, and I believe they have an actual warhammer in their symbol. So they are clearly related to Water 7, maybe ancient Water 7 in some way, and those people. We then also hear about an army of frozen giants. Jarl then mentions after that, and we believe that those are probably the ones we see at Punk Hazard, but those could also be some of the Galera Warhammer Company that we see on Punk Hazard, where I think it was Nami and Sanji and Chopper going through that underground passage where it was just a frozen area with a ton of giants. That's probably who those are. The last letter that Jarl mentioned getting from the Galera Warhammer Company said that they faced a great enemy and that they were captured. Probably by the world government, maybe, I don't know if at Punk Hazard, but moved to Punk Hazard at some point. Really wild. I'm sure we're going to get somewhere on that, and we're going to figure out how that's more important as we continue on. That, or we're going to figure it out later in the story, more in the current day. We then cut to 48 years later. Loki's just kind of terrorizing the town at this point, causing trouble for everybody. He's already a troubled youth going through, after what he's already gone through in the first months that we saw of his life, no wonder he's causing trouble for everybody. After this, he goes back to the lower realm trying to off himself again after having issues with Haradin and the other young giant warrior pirates at that point, or the new giant warrior pirates, Gerd and Goldberg and all them. He sees them, has issues with them. He goes to off himself, and he ends up meeting Rox, Shiki, Whitebeard, and Stussy. down in the underworld. And that's how the chapter actually ends, is them coming across Loki sitting up and crying. We start 1155, that's about 48 years, and we cut to 48 years ago, where we actually get to see the reverie that they were at, where Rox met Emu, came across Emu. We actually get to see or who looks like Gunko, and we would assume would be Gunko, who is probably Emu's vassal, number one person who seems to actually come in contact with her or Emu or them outside of the 5 Elder Stars. We are told that Rox is a Davy Jonesian pirate. We only have heard that mentioned a couple different times in the story, Davy Jonesian and whatever that means. He said that one day he will be back. I'm guessing that to fight or see Emu again. I'm guessing that's probably going to relate to Blackbeard, since Blackbeard is his son. I don't know if it's just saying he's going to be back and then it said Blackbeard's going to be back to deal with Emu. We don't really know what Blackbeard wants other than to become a country under the world government. But I'm sure that his plans relate in some way to correspond with this and Rox's plans with Emu. After that, we come across Harald and Rox end up meeting each other at the Reverie, and they clash. Their clash is actually pretty crazy. It sends like a shockwave that blows everybody back within 5 kilometers, which is a pretty huge radius. After that, Rox tells Harald where to go, and they both jump off. Well, Harald jumps off the red line and the one way, and Rox goes off the other way to go and escape. At this point, we then find out that Rox had just killed an admiral prior to this. So then that really raises his notoriety in the world, and he becomes more of a wanted person, and he gains more infamy. He then steals a heavenly tribute and destroys a set of the Gates of Justice, which is nuts, because the Gates of Justice, if you don't remember, are the big gates at, going between, Innie's Lobby and Impel Down. Those humongous gates that we see Bon Clay press the button to shut and all that going on, those get destroyed by Rox. That's absolutely bananas. I would love to have seen it. They just tell us that it happens. But it's absolutely crazy as a feat, honestly. After he collects this treasure, he begins to target pirates. He's using this money, it says, to fund the Rox pirate activities. So after collecting all that money from the Heavenly Tribute, he's then able to go and do whatever he wants, and he has all the money he needs to build ships, any weapons, any food, set up shop. Purchase anything. Money is then not a real object to him at the moment. So he then goes around targeting pirates to pick up for his crew using the Davy back fight, which is apparently an old pirate tradition. We had heard this from Robin back during Long Ring Long Land when we got into a Davy back fight. There's been long-going theories that it was going to become relevant again to the story, the whole idea of a Davy back fight. And It is, I guess. I mean, we've seen it now that the Rox Pirates did it, and that was actually what we figured was that's who the person of Pirate Island, which is Rox, though he didn't originate Pirate Island, but he made it a lot more famous, we're going to see later, is that we know that it came from there, and so a lot of people figured his crew was made up that way, and that is the case. He used the Davy backfight to actually acquire his crew members. It's a pretty great way to actually get a lot of great crew members, because they don't even got to want to join you, but if they're pirates and they follow tradition, then they have to no matter what. We cut to some years later, where we see Rox going back to Elbaf again. We end up meeting Don Marlin at that point, Ganswy, who we ended up seeing at Thriller Bark as one of the zombies, and we get to see Ochoku or Wang, who we had heard about. Ochoku is the guy who took over Pirate Island after Rox, who had it taken from him by Blackbeard just a few years ago in the actual story. Rox tries to recruit Harald again. He continues to turn him down. This happens over and over again until the end of one of the newer or I think it's 1156 actually, where it insinuates that Rox either stops asking or Harald gives in and joins him, or in some way they end up working together. The Rox Pirates become... Loki at this point begins to idolize the Rox Pirates, and he starts to try to join them every time he sees them. Kind of like how Luffy did with the Shanks. Kind of mimicking or mirroring Luffy in that way with Loki. Which is kind of... It's pretty cool, because we've already seen that Luffy seems to understand Loki more than a lot of people off the rip, because he asked him to join the crew. He can tell that he's not a bad person, while everybody else thinks he's awful. Luffy can tell that he's really not. The Rox Pirates begin to become a lot more infamous at this point in the story, too, and that's the end of the chapter. We then cut into 1156, and I'll be honest, these last two chapters really don't have as much info dump going on. They're a lot more just cutting around to see cool scenes, young versions of, big infamous pirates that we'd heard of, but we never got to see them in their heyday. So 1156 is idols. The idols at this point that it refers to on the sea are the Kuja pirates, who are Gloriosa as the captain and Shaki, at that point being her vice captain or second in command. Roger and his crew being with Rayleigh and Scopper. Garp as a marine, the Rock's crew themselves, etc. Those are the big idols out on the sea at that point. That's the chapter where we get to meet Tritoma. She is the empress who ruled Amazon Lily before Boa Hancock and after Shaki. After this, we get to see, Roger actually, we get to find out that Roger was trying to recruit Shaki to his crew and kind of take her as a treasure for himself because he was a 7-4 and he was big in love with Shaki, which is funny because she later ends up with Rayleigh, who she's into, and that's his vice captain. At that point, Gloriosa is actually into Roger, and then she actually falls lovesick for Roger, which we knew that Gloriosa fell lovesick for a great pirate. Many people theorized it was Roger. It was him. And then at that point, Shaki actually becomes the Empress of Amazon Lily and the captain of the Kuja pirates. We end up then cutting to Harald trying to help. He ends up sinking a world government ship. No, actually, I lied. What happens at that point, let me see. Harald ends up trying to help Loki, who is a troubled youth at this point, causing trouble with lots of people on Elbaf. And like I said, he's trying to join the Rock's crew every time he sees him, and Rox continues to come to try to recruit Harald. Harald continues to tell him no. Loki continues to try to join the Rock's crew, and this cycle kind of continues. The Rock's crew around this time take over Pirate Island. We don't know who had it at that point, but it says they take it over, so it was already established. It's as the Island of Pirates. We just don't know who was ruling it at that point. At that right then, we also see Kyo the Wicked, who is a mercenary from a different part of the sea, who is actually known as Silver Axe later on. We see him approaching Pirate Island to join the Rock's crew as well, or he ends up joining them. Whether that's why he's there, or if he's there to try to take them on and then ends up joining them. Either way. We also then get to meet young Linlin, younger Stroizen, still older than when we saw him clearly when he was working, when he met Big Mom and saw the whole incident. I don't know how old Stroizen was then. He was a young man then, so at this point he's probably middle-aged, while Linlin's pretty young. We also get to see Captain John for the first time as a Rock's pirate who is young. First time we've seen him alive at this point. Prior to this, we had seen him at Thriller Bark dead. And then we also get to see Barbell the Fishman and Kaido when he was real young, which was really cool. But that's about the end of that chapter. And then we cut into 1157, which is a lot more Rock's pirate based, just cutting around, seeing them in cool scenes with them. It starts with the Rock's pirates raiding the Foot Colony, the Temple of the International Philanthropy Federation, which are just clearly... Big Mom implies that they're clearly a twisted corporation and that they're not actually, using the money for what they're saying that they're going to use it for, which is for children, that they're just using it for themselves. We see Shiki trying to blow up Silver Axe, Kaido, and Whitebeard because he has a history with Silver Axe already, where I guess it's kind of like a Garp and Roger, a Luffy and Smoker, that kind of dynamic. So he tries to blow them up. In the 2 years since at that point where the Rock's pirates had officially became a crew, their reputation had spoke for itself. They had 16 raids, 76 ships that they had sank, 14 ports were reduced to ash, 5 towns were wiped off the map, 1 nation brought to ruin. An interesting note is that it brings up that they had 3 violations of Article 18 of international law. To my knowledge, I don't know what that is. I'm curious though. And then it says that they erased 25 criminal records. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I'll be honest, that's a pretty crazy track record in 2 years. That's nuts, because for reference, right, a crazy track record for another crew would be like the Straw Hats, right, who in less than a year, probably 9 months or so, conquered, got to, from the east into the Grand Line, and then we're ready to move to the New World, right, before we ended up having the 2-year time skip. And now within months, again, less than a year, we're getting through the New World like crazy. So in less than on the sea, traveling probably about 2 or so years, the Straw Hats have done a lot. Luffy's become an emperor in essentially 2 years of being out on the ocean. But in their 2 years, the Rock's crew had done a lot. It's absolutely nuts. This was the era of Rocks. They're really, even with Roger and everybody else kind of running around doing their thing, it was the Rocks era at this point. We then cut to Inishi, which is another country in the New World, where the world government is They're having an altercation with the people there. We end up seeing Harald actually attack the fleet over the world government, attacking the people. Him trying to save them. This impedes Harald from being able to join the world government. Again, they already had issues with him, but this kind of impedes him once again on that process. And this is kind of where the end of this chapter probably gets planned by the Gorosei, for this was the final straw, where now they're not going to let him join, but they're going to they'll let Harald join if he does something crazy, like killing rocks, and if he does that for them. But otherwise, they're just going to keep pulling him along, and they're not going to ever let him join. They're able to kind of vilify him at this point with this information in the news. We end up seeing Rox sometime later come back to meet with Harald again, and then at that point, and again, he continues to tell him no, that he's not going to join him, but this is around the last time I think we actually see him ask Harald to join his crew. We get to cut to see a young Garp, Suru, and Sengoku. They were vice admirals at this point, which is the highest point that Suru and Garp actually get to. Sengoku moves to, we would assume, admiral, and then fleet admiral, because we know he becomes a fleet admiral. And we get to see Kong as an admiral, who, again, we would assume becomes fleet admiral, because we know him as commander-in-chief currently in the story. We then cut forward to 42 years later, where Shaki arrives on Hachinosu. At this point, she is no longer the empress of the Kuja pirates. It's now Tritoma who takes over, who we had just met some years back. Gloriosa has a great line about Big Mom that I loved so much, saying that she cranks out kids like popcorn. It's absolutely great. I love Gloriosa. I thought she was cool as an old lady, as Grandma Nyon, but she's really cool in her prime. After that, we see Shaki, when she gets to the island, she sets up her rip-off bar. And then she is said to be known as the crown jewel of the island. And that's where I really think Shaki is going to be probably kidnapped by the world government or the Gods Knights, because we had mentioned to us in the prior flashbacks about God Valley that the world government had stolen the treasure of Pirate Island, or Pirate Island's treasure, and Garp had said, well, no wonder that the pirates are going to come and try to take it back and attack you guys. You took their treasure. We had assumed at that point that it was devil fruits, because that's what we knew were at God's Valley, or at God Valley, as some of the like the prizes were the Azure Dragon fruit that Kaido got and the Pawpaw fruit that Kuma got, right? But it could be that Shaki was captured as a slave and was going to be auctioned, or essentially, given away as a slave, and that's why God Valley could have started. Because they make a point to mention that as the crown jewel, and she was so special, she was a treasure, and that a treasure is always a target for theft. So I'm pretty sure they're implying she's going to get kidnapped and snatched, and that's actually what's going to start bringing God Valley to a head. We then cut to the elders at Marijois, who are saying that the only way that they're going to let Harald join the world government is if he kills rocks for them. We know Harald's not going to do that. So Harald's going to instead have something happen where I'm assuming his own people, his own guards, are going to get Dami reversied by the world government or by Emu, and they're going to take him out because he chooses not to work with them and help them with rocks. And after the God Valley incident, I actually don't know if the God Valley incident happens before Harald is killed, if I'm not mistaken. So I would have to guess that after, the God Valley incident's dealt with and they have no more use for Harald to take out rocks, they just decide to kind of take him out and try to work their way into taking over Elbaf themselves. And that's why I'm thinking, or what I'm thinking probably happened to Harald's guards and why they attacked him and all that nonsense. I'm pretty sure Shaki's going to get snatched, and that's what's going to start God Valley. But that's what I got out of that last chapter. That's the biggest takeaway I got theory-wise. I'm pretty sure Shaki's going to get kidnapped, and that's what's going to cause God Valley. And then after God Valley, they have no use for Harald, and that's essentially why they're going to try to start taking over Elbaf after that point. So that's kind of the basic rundown. This is a little bit of a longer video. That's the basic rundown I've got from 1152 through 1157. That's the flashback as of now. I don't think, like I said, we're going to be done with this flashback until at least 1160 or farther, 3 or so more chapters. We might, honestly, at about 5 chapters in now, we might even get another 5 or so. I don't know how long the Odin flashback was in Wano, but it was very long. So Oda's been known to be able to make some of these long flashbacks work fine. And I'm enjoying it. I think it's really awesome so far, getting to see everything that we're seeing and getting to see the One Piece world at different ages, like different time periods. It's really cool. So we'll kind of see where things go. But those are my kind of thoughts and perspectives as to from kind of what we've seen and what I think is going to be coming based on what we're seeing. Clearly, we're going to get something involving how Shanks is very important to the story. He's a child of destiny, and we're going to get to understand if he was a God's Knight or what happened and why he goes to Marijois and kind of what's happened with him there at the Reverie, etc. We're going to get to find out what happens to Harold here inevitably, and I'm pretty sure Shaki's going to get kidnapped. That's where I'm thinking we're going to get to here in the next few chapters. We're going to find out about that and what led to God Valley. I don't know if we're going to get the whole God Valley incident, but I think we're going to get more of God Valley stuff coming up. And then we'll cut back probably after seeing some of that to Elbaf itself and get to see how we're going to handle the God's Knights in real time after we see how some of them are maybe handled in the past. Kind of wild. But anyways, we'll see how things go. This is my first time getting out a video outside of my normal live reactions, so hopefully it goes over well. I just figured I'd get something out because we're on break anyway, so we're probably not getting another chapter for... I don't even think we're getting one later this week. I don't think we're actually getting one till probably, if I had to guess, the end of this month sometime, I think, is when the next chapter is releasing. So I'll try to get out another video of some kind. I don't know if it'll be One Piece related. I'm thinking about branching out content-wise. But I'm going to see about getting something else out in the meantime so that way I can keep stuff coming out on the channel. I appreciate everybody who stops by and gives a watch, no matter how long you're watching for. I keep up with the analytics the best I can in terms of views. I've gotten a couple subscribers. I appreciate everybody who views and subscribes. Any likes, subscribes, comments on the video, any of that really does help. And it really just tell me that the videos are getting somewhere to some real people. And it just really helps motivate me to want to keep making more. So I hope everybody has had a good week since probably about how long it's been since my last video. So hope everybody's had a good week. Hope everybody has a good week or so to come until I drop my next one. But until then, just keep enjoying life. Go out and have some fun. Tell somebody you love them. And have a good day. Bye.